There they lie, just off the city centre, shaped by nature, landscaped by men. This is Bukit Brown Cemetery. At rest are the country's forefathers, whose collective timelines span 150 years of our development into modern Singapore. Their tombstones are touchstones in living memory for a new generation of descendants. This is our history from the hills. Bukit Brown Cemetery is part of a larger complex which adjoins the cemeteries of Seh Ong, Lau Sua and Kopi Sua. Covering an area of nearly 400 acres and with over 200,000 graves, it has been documented as the largest Chinese cemetery complex outside of China.
The whole area comprises, even to today, comprises of 4 Chinese cemeteries. The Seh Ong Cemetery, which belongs to the Ong clan still today, Lau Sua and Kopi Sua, which belong to the Hokkien Hui Kwan, and the state-run cemetery, which is Bukit Brown Municipal Cemetery.
When I first came here, I was surprised, first by the number of graves, and second by the antiquity of the grave. Some of the graves date back all the way back to the 19th century. So I was surprised, you still can find such old things in Singapore, man?
When I first came here, I didn't know that all the famous people were buried here. I mean, it was just like, as a Singaporean, I went to Singapore schools. I have no idea this place existed.
In 2011, when the government announced plans to build a highway across Bukit Brown to alleviate traffic, interest in the cemetery was revived.
Bukit Brown was virtually an abandoned cemetery, except for the few families who still rigorously maintain that Qingming festival. Otherwise, it was overgrown, forgotten, until last September when the LTA announced plans for this new road. And so, here suddenly you have an issue that then revives, creates new memories.
A group of volunteers calling themselves Brownies started public tours on weekends because of the history they themselves were able to discover.
We hear fellow guides talking, we hear descendants talking, we hear teachers sharing. So it was a very nice experience. All these stories that we gather don't come from textbooks, don't come from your friends, family even. So it's for me, it's just gratifying to hear it from one place. You can collect all this. It's really interesting.
Tan Chaw Nam, a fervent supporter of Sun Yat-sen in his revolutionary cause. Tan Kim Cheng, our first diplomatic consul to Siam. Tay Ko Yat, a pioneer in the transport industry and a war hero. Khoo Kei Hien, founder of a stockbroking firm. They are among the pioneers of pre-independent Singapore buried in Bukit Brown.
Just talking about road names, for example, I have already uncovered more than 30 pioneers with roads named after them. Like, for example, if you take MRT, will be Boon Lay, and then roads will be Eng Neo, and then Kim Ching, Tan Kui Lan, and Keong Siak.
I lived on Kim Hock Road and didn't know that Mr. Kim Hock was buried here.
Bukit Brown, together with Seh Ong Cemetery, were part of a 200-acre parcel of land which was a gift to the Ong clan by 3 of its clansmen. Seh Ong is spread over 5 hills and a major road now cuts through it. Today, Ong Tui Im is looking for her great-great-grandfather, who was one of the 3 Ongs who bought the land. With her is Raymond Goh, a licensed cemetery guide who has been helping descendants find lost ancestors.
This map here, can you relate it to your map in Chinese?
So according to what I think, what he will be buried is somewhere near, this is actually Hill 4.
Oh, I see,
and
this is Hill 4.
Hill 5.
Which at the moment is flattened out already because of the golf course.
Yes, so what we are looking now is around the grave around here, this area.
Okay.
Just weeks before, Tui Im found a note by her grandfather about 3 graves which were exhumed from the family's estate in Telok Blangah and transferred to Seh Ong.
My brother Chin Leong told me in the car this morning that as a child he accompanied grandmother to this place in Adam Road before the building of the expressway.
With fresh clues, Chui Im is on the trail of what she hopes are the graves of great-great-grandfather Ong Chong Chu, his eldest son, and a baby grandson.
There's a lot of broken branches. No? Yeah. So the problem with all this area is that
Overgrown.
overgrown and
Creepers
some
and weeds.
weeds, and some of the tombs are exhumed, so they are potholes. So you have to be careful not to fall down into the pothole.
Okay.
Don't come to this place at night.
Okay.
Chui Im's interest in her roots was sparked by a chance question posed by her brother when their grandfather was alive.
Older brother asked grandfather, Ong Ki Soon is your father. Did he come from China, or did his father or perhaps another one before him come over? And that was when grandfather Ong Siu Kiam clarified, no, it's Ki Soon's father Ong Chong Chiu was a person who braved the seas and came over and died in 1888. So that stayed in my mind when the book by Song Ong Siang about the Chinese in Singapore for 100 years fell like manna into my lap. And of course, I turned to the index, you see. Hey, Ong Chong Chiu is mentioned here. Gosh, what did he do? How did he warrant this bit of fame? And that was when I discovered that he and two associates had bought this piece of land and had donated it. And today, it is Bukit Brown.
This one is from White Rock.
This guy,
Yeah.
Bai
So
Jiao.
19 Ong Chi Chu, Tan Guang Nio. No. You see, all your ancestors come from White Rock.
Yeah.
So are you?
Oh, that's
yeah.
them.
Yeah. And this is 1952. And the other one is 1958. So it's possible that those reburied in 1953 would be around this area.
Filial piety is a highly revered virtue of respect for one's parents and ancestors among the Chinese. Stories of this Confucian philosophy are illustrated in the 24 filial exemplars and depict how children exercised this virtue, as seen here in these tomb reliefs.
My name is Jo Prudence, and I am the great-great-granddaughter of George Henry Brown, after whom this cemetery is named.
He was a ship and plantation owner who started G.H. Brown and Company in 1854, after making his way from Calcutta to Penang and on to Singapore.
Most of the British traders would have come out from India, from Bengal, where the company had its base, where they worked and retired from. One or two, like Guthrie, came as far as South Africa. A number may have been based in Penang or Malacca and were attracted to the free port status of Singapore. Raffles proposing various schemes to set up ports in various parts of Southeast Asia, and in so doing, secure not only the trade route to China, but also the trade, as much of the trade as possible, spice trade of Southeast Asia for the East India Company.
Jo, however, flew from London just a day before. She catches up with volunteer guide Claire Liao, whom she met a year back.
Good morning. I'm so looking forward to hearing what's going on.
Since we last met,
Yes,
has it been a year?
Yes, it has.
So much has happened.
Absolutely. I want to hear everything. The most beautiful place on earth. It really is, isn't it? It's the most beautiful place in Singapore.
Much of what Jo knows about George Henry Brown comes from the diary of Ellen Knight, starting from when she first left England.
This is the diary from 1855 of my great-grandmother. And this particular diary is an account of her journey. It took 6 weeks, 3 boats, a lot of adventures, but in her beautiful copper script handwriting, she kept a very fine account. And it ends on the day that she arrived in Singapore Harbour to meet the man who had paid for her to come out, but actually she had never met him before.
So Miss Knight married her Mr. Brown, and among the 3 daughters they had was Charlotte, Joe's great-grandmother. She was the artist in the family and captured scenes from the family estate in Mount Pleasant, which was very close to Bukit Brown. George maintained a range of business interests, from an office in the city to plantations. According to Ellen's diaries, he enjoyed building carriages and was fond of tinkering about with machinery. He died in Penang in 1882, when he was there trying to recuperate from an accident with a machine on his tapioca plantation. What was Brown's land became land for the Ong clan. Back on the trail of Ong Chong Chu, the terrain proves too difficult to navigate.
Jim, I think the terrain is a bit rough, so I'll find another day where I come myself. And this time, let's say, go and look for your
different location one. Take a look at that one.
Take a look at that one. Yeah.
Chui Im, however, has already uncovered much into her own roots.
Great-great-grandfather Ong Chong Chiu with 2 associates, Ong Yu Hai and Ong Q Ho, migrated from Baijiao in Fujian province. They felt that they had got a lot from the community in Singapore, so it was time to give something back to the communities. They had planned to let it be used by the poorer members of the Ong clan, but apparently it was rather unutilized, so the British authorities around about 1918-1920 decided that Singapore really needed a Chinese cemetery, and let's use this piece of land for the use of the community rather than just for the Ongs.
In 2006, Ong Tui Im published a tribute to her ancestor, and taking a leaf from his life, proceeds from the book were donated to charity.
Oh, of course, I was very proud of it, that they could do something significant, they could do something that would be long-standing and everlasting, hopefully, a cemetery for the Ongs, and later on it be transferred over, and other Chinese of other names, surnames were allowed to be buried here. So that, I thought, was a wonderful gift.
Contributions by early pioneers are also landmarked by road names.
This road was a service road leading to the rubber estates belonging to a gentleman by the name of Brown. And then finally, when Bukit Brown became a cemetery, the commissioners decided to name it Kiam Hock Road after my grandfather, because he spent a lot of effort and time to lobby for the land to become a municipal cemetery.
Tan Kiam Hock was among the most prominent business and community leaders of his time. Born in Penang, he was educated in English at the Penang Free School, as was the custom for sons of prominent Baba merchants. But he was also well-versed enough in the Chinese classics to help translate tales such as the Sam Kok, the Three Kingdoms, to Baba Malay, the patois of the Peranakans. Every step Eric takes brings him closer to the grandfather he never knew, to the 27-year-old Tan Kiam Hock, who arrived in Singapore in 1889 after a 2-year stint in Calcutta in the produce business. Before India, he already chalked up 8 years in Penang with a mercantile bank with businesses in London, China, and India.
The one on the right is the tombstone of Tan Kiam Hock, my grandfather, Municipal Commissioner, Justice of the Peace. And the road leading to this cemetery is named after him, because he lobbied very hard for this plot of land to be given to the Chinese for burial. Before that, the Chinese were buried all over the island in different clan cemeteries. But now, or after he lobbied, they have a communal Chinese cemetery. His first interest, I think, was in the opium and spirits farms. Then he went on to other interests, one of them being the Tanjong Pagar docks.
Opium was not on Raffles's mind. The trade in opium was not there. The trade in opium is a slightly later development of the 1830s, 1840s, when the East India Company found that the only way to balance its deficits in its trade with China was to export opium.
One of Tan Kiam Hok's major business successes was the Tanjong Pagar docks.
The development, opening of Suez Canal, and more important, the advent of steam transformed the nature of trade in Singapore. For the Suez Canal, it was a shortening of that sea passage here, so quicker delivery of goods and transfer. But more important was the advent of the streets, of the steamships. Number one, trade was no longer dependent on the monsoons and on the winds here. Number two, the demand for coal, because you can only put that much coal on a ship. You got to leave more space for your goods. So you needed coaling stations. Now, where do you have these piles of coal in Singapore? Not in Chinatown, there's no space. So that was when, because of this need for coal, the increased volume of shipping, a new harbor had to be built after 1869, and that was where Tanjong Pagar then developed the new harbor, the new coaling station to service this new wave, this new cycle of trade.
The docks at that time were massive, huge, 2.5 mile long, and they had about 200 or 2,000 people working there at one time. So my grandfather provided labor to the Tanjong Pagar docks.
Tanjong Pagar docks laid the foundation for what is today the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. When he passed away in 1922, he had fathered 13 children, 9 sons, 4 daughters. Tributes hailed Tan Kiam Hok as a man of progressive ideas, a Pukka businessman, a sincere friend to the education of Chinese girls, and respected for his contributions to the welfare of the Chinese community everywhere. Tan Kiam Hok, his first wife and a daughter were originally buried at the Alexandra Road Hokkien Cemetery.
They are quite obviously not the same kind that you would see in a Chinese grave, the one with the round or omega-shaped plot. Here there are 3 graves or gravestones side by side, so it points to the fact that they were reinterred in this location. Probably because he was the one that resulted in Bukit Brown, so why not be his final resting place?
Before social media came into popularity, tombstones were the medium of choice for the sharing of personal information. Information carved on tombstones include their birthplace, year of death, names of spouses, children, grandchildren, and even their instant message to future generations.
This is the grave of Municipal Commissioner Si Tiong-hua, who, with Tan Kiam Hok, lobbied for Bukit Brown to become a state cemetery. At the end of 1921, he asked about its status in the legislature and got a final confirmation that it would be opened on 1st January 1922.
Initially, the government felt that the Chinese community would not be keen on having a state-run cemetery which was subject to very strict burial plots and all that, because the Chinese prefer to follow feng shui principles. But anyway, just before 1920, in a few years before 1920, the government finally began to agree to the need for a municipal Chinese cemetery. And in 1919, they set about trying to acquire this plot of land. And the plot that they had decided upon was that at Bukit Brown. And this space at Bukit Brown was already being used as a clan Chinese cemetery. And the government wanted to buy over a fairly large plot from the Ong clan. And eventually they were successful in doing so, and that's the part that became Bukit Brown.
It closed in 1973, and in 2011, the burial registry was put online for descendants who wanted to trace their ancestors. For Triim, the grave of the second son of Ong Chong-chu had always been known in their family history. Ong Ki-sun is Triim's great-grandfather who died in 1925. Crafted in China, its sculptured paneling and statuary speaks of grandeur and great wealth.
What little I gathered came from the title deeds, no? Because some of them are really in tatters. That was more or less the work of his son, the contribution of his son, Ong Ki-sun, my great-grandfather. He was the one who really went into property.
Now landscaped by nature, the names of descendants who mourned his death are still etched in stone, including grandfather Ong Siu Kiam and her own father, Ong Kim Seng.
The search continues for us because we want to try and identify whose graves, who were the three persons whose graves had been moved from Teluk Blangah, the family estate, to this spot. We've got to hopefully locate them and, recognize them.
Records tattered and torn, fragments of a continuing narrative dot the landscape.
We read about these characters in history, we tell our visitors about them at the museum, and here we are really seeing a piece of history. We are looking at the tomb and, seeing the resting place of these very famous personalities that we read about, that we talk about.
You may be standing in front of the TV now, enjoying this place or looking at the photos, archives, but it never beat the actual experience of physically walking into this place, soaking in the atmosphere, listening to the calls of nature, looking at the century-old graves, and let you feel from whence you come from, because this tells you the whole story back how Singapore is being built, the struggles put in by the builders of a nation, and then you can really feel your place and what you ought to do and what you ought to see, from where you come from and from whence you go. That's why this place is such a magical place. But you must make the effort to come down here.
For Joe Prudence, the words of Alan Knight at the end of her first day in Singapore after 6 weeks at sea echoes the hopes and dreams of the early immigrants who arrived on our shores.
Very glad to retire to rest, grateful to the hand which has led me hitherto and brought me safely through clouds, storms and sunshine to what I hope may prove a haven of peaceful rest, as far as we may expect rest in this world.